From the first flecks of gold pulled from a riverbed, to the silent veins ripped from Potasi's mountains, to the dust choked chaos of California in 1849, humanity has always chased the treasure. We find it, we fight over it, we waste it, and somehow we find a way to never, ever learn. Those old rushes made empires very rich and then hollowed them out. Spain's silver curse flooded Europe with coin, only to crash its economy. The California gold rush built cities overnight, but it also burned through lives like kindling. Every time we dig deep, we dream even bigger than before, and then we pay for it. Now imagine all of that scaled up to the stars. Because above your heads, locked in asteroids and exoplanets, there are riches that make every past empire look like a kid's lemonade stand. Platinum for fusion reactors, uranium for power, rare earths for every circuit and screen, oceans of water, ice for fuel, for entire planets with resources we can't even name, and maybe elements that have yet to be discovered. And so the fever is already here. Companies are sketching mining plans as we speak. Nations are sharpening their legal knives. Investors whisper about trillionaires. And somewhere in the back of every human heart, there's that old, dangerous gleam. The rush is coming. I'm your host, J.E. This is In The Crease, ITC episode 69, the Exoplanet Gold Rush. And yes, before you ask, this number does strangely fit. Because if humanity is going to start drilling shafts and new frontiers, you better believe there's going to be a little smidgen of innuendo here and there along the way. But jokes aside, tonight we're chasing actually something deadly serious. This isn't just about shiny rocks in the sky. It's about science, economics, and philosophy colliding in the infinite frontier. It's about whether abundance frees us or ruins us. And it's about the final question. If we find others out there, not just rocks, but neighbors, what happens when they step into the marketplace? So grab your pickaxe or whatever favorite Minecraft skin you may have because we're going to dig into this. Now, history has taught us that it is full of gold rushes, literal and metaphorical, and almost none of them in the way their dreamers expected. They always start with whispers. Psst, hey, there's treasures out there, right? Just waiting. Just waiting. Endless wealth for the taking. Then, of course, comes the stampedes, the markets, the fortunes, and usually, inevitably, the collapse. Let's take Spain in the 16th century. At first glance, they really hit the jackpot. Silver from the Americas, mountains of it, especially from modern day Bolivia. It flowed into Europe by the shipload. Imagine endless galleons stacked with bars of silver, a glittering tide crossing the Atlantic. Spain thought it had secured eternal dominance, riches beyond even their imagining. Except it wasn't a blessing, it was a curse. Economists today called it the resource curse, when sudden wealth destabilizes instead of strengthens. Spain's silver basically caused runaway inflation. Prices soared, wages stagnated, debts ballooned. The empire became addicted to silver the way a gambler becomes addicted to credit. Instead of investing in industry or innovation, Spain imported, will be polite, borrowed, and overspent. And by the 17th century, the empire that had once bestrode the world like a colossus was crumbling, hollowed out by its own supposed treasure. So yeah, it's right. They hit the jackpot, then managed to bankrupt themselves with it. Imagine winning the lottery and ending up worse off because you spent the whole thing on flamenco lessons and very, very bad box wine as I push mine aside and have a sip. That said, the lesson was clear. Treasure without discipline isn't wealth. It's quicksand. You know, that thing everyone that was born in the 70s and maybe early 80s were fearful of. Now let's fast forward a little bit to California, 1849. It's the same fever with just a new coat of paint. Gold was discovered at Sutter's Mill, and suddenly half the planet was on the move. Ships abandoned in San Francisco Bay, boomtowns exploding from dirt crossroads to roaring cities in just a matter of weeks. Men willing to risk everything for the chance to pan a few flakes from a muddy stream. And yeah, sure, some absolutely got rich, but far more did not. Prices for basic goods skyrocketed. A single egg in San Francisco could cost as much as a full day's wages back east. Disease? Yeah, guess what? That was running rampant too. Law was often enforced at gunpoint, and just as quickly as the rush had begun, the best claims were gone, leaving behind ghost towns, broken families, and fortunes lost more to gambling tables and swindlers than probably the mining itself. The Klondikes in 1890s, that was the same story as well. Men freezing to death in Yukon passes for that hope, that chance at gold. While storekeepers and shipping companies, well, they made the real money. But here's the thing. It wasn't just about precious metals. The fever, it infects markets of every kind. Let's go to the 1630s, to the Dutch tulip mania. Really, I'm going to talk tulips here. They're quite beautiful flowers. They were imported from the Ottoman Empire, and they became status symbols in Holland. At the height of the craze, one bulb could sell for more than a skilled craftsman earned in 10 years. People mortgaged houses just to buy bulbs, and then inevitably the bubble would burst. Prices collapsed almost overnight. Fortunes gone, reputations even worse. A flower craze had nearly wrecked an economy. Or let's go to the South Sea bubble a century later in England. Investors poured their life savings in the shares of a trading company that promised impossible profits. Politicians hyped it, speculators swarmed to it, and by the time it had collapsed, thousands were ruined. Isaac Newton, yes, that Isaac Newton famously lost a fortune in the crash. His bitter comment still echoes, quote, I can calculate the motions of heavenly bodies, but not the madness of men, unquote. Now that madness is a through line. And if you want a modern example, well, let's look at some of the cryptocurrency bubbles for the last decade. At their peak, people were selling NFTs of pixelized cartoons for way too much money, promising endless wealth from digital scarcity. And then, boom, the market fell out. And all that future gold turned out to be, in many cases, nothing but worthless pixels. At least, hey, one thing about the tulip mania, they still at least had flowers to look at. But here's, well, I'll say it, here's the conservative truth on the matter. Humans don't change. Human nature doesn't evolve as fast as the technology. Every time a new frontier opens, some bit of the population has that fever that takes hold. The promise of endless riches blinds us to the risks, the discipline, the long term consequences. And we tell ourselves, don't worry, this time will be different. But it never is. Spain thought silver would make it eternal. California thought gold would make everyone rich. Holland thought flowers would be money forever, and crypto promised liberation from governments and banks. And while we're still in the infancy of that, and there are some good front runners, it's still how many have gone the way of the dodo. So every time it's kind of the same cycle, the rush, the bubble, the crash, and the ruin. And now here we are again, whispering once more. Not about El Dorado, not about the silver mines or .com stocks, but about asteroids and exoplanets. about riches floating in the void, waiting for someone bold enough or reckless or a combination thereof to claim them. Of course, history tells us how this will end unless we learn restraint, unless we approach the next frontier with wisdom instead of a fever. The exoplanet gold rush will not make us gods. It will make us gamblers in space, burning fortunes on the promise of a treasure that probably will only bankrupt us faster than our current pace. And that is where we're really going to begin. Because not all space rocks are created equal. Scientists, well, they break them into three main types: the C type, the S type, and the M type. I'm not going to go into the details of it, just trust me. Let's go to something I've mentioned on The Lost Wonder once or twice, the Psyche 16. It's orbiting between Mars and Jupiter. NASA's sending a probe there right now. Estimates suggest it holds iron and nickel worth, and I'm not exaggerating, quadrillions of dollars at Earth market prices. Or to put it in perspective, that's enough metal to collapse, the global economy 1,000 times over if you tried to sell it all at once. And that's just one little rock. There are millions of them scattered through the asteroid belt and near Earth space, waiting like locked vaults. So one chunk of spacecraft could make every miner on Earth obsolete. Now, if asteroids are treasure chests, exoplanets are entire bank vaults. We've now cataloged over 5,500 confirmed exoplanets. Most most are gas giants, but a growing number of rocky worlds or mini Neptunes or super Earths are being found. Some orbit stars richer in heavy elements than our own, which means their crust might be loaded with uranium, thorium, or even elements we haven't discovered yet. Now, is it speculative? Yes. But every time science has cracked open a new frontier, we have found more than we expected. Think about helium. On Earth, it was a curiosity trapped among natural gas. On the moon, helium 3 exists in abundance, and it's a potential fuel for fusion reactors. Suddenly, the moon, it isn't just a barren rock, it's now an energy mine. So, what happens if we stumble across element 119 sitting naturally in the crust of a super Earth, or worse, something no periodic table even prepares us for? A material that bends energy, superconducts at room temperature, or destabilizes everything we thought we knew about physics. If history shows us anything, the market won't wait for the science. Investors will be selling unobtainium futures before the first shovel hits the alien dirt. But okay, how do you mine the sky? We have to get practical here. You have to figure out actually how to mine an asteroid. Nobody's loading up a spaceship with pickaxes and hard hats. The likely methods sound more like science fiction than construction manuals. You have capture and tow, strap ion engines or maybe solar sails onto a small asteroid, drag it into a lunar orbit, then process it there. You could do in situ mining, send robotic swarms to strip mine the surface using solar concentrators to melt ore and eject waste. What about mass drivers? If you will, space rail guns, because who doesn't like to get railed? Flinging refined metal ingots toward Earth orbit. Controlled, of course. And by controlled, I mean, let's hope we don't accidentally eat a 200-ton plutonium bullet toward Kansas. Then we also have the Holy Grail, the self-replicating robots. Robots that build more robots, chewing through our asteroids like cosmic termites until they get a steady flow of ore. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're laughing a little bit at this, but the technology is closer than people think. Companies like Planetary Resources and Deep Space Industries, which have now been absorbed into bigger firms, were already drafting plans in the 2010s. NASA and private ventures are testing solar electric propulsion systems that could haul heavy loads. And every major spacefaring nation is watching closely. I mean, let's face it, it's doable. I mean, it's not easy, it's not cheap, but it is possible. And that possibility alone is enough to spark a new fever. But we haven't talked about something that might be the real prize. The first thing worth mining in space isn't platinum or gold or uranium or thorium or any of that. It's water. Because water means survival for astronauts. Water means hydrogen and oxygen for fuel. Whoever controls the gas stations of the solar system controls the highway of the future. And C type asteroids, plus the poles of the moon, hold millions of tons of it. So if you want to picture the first space rush, don't think of a miner hauling a chunk of gold out of the crater. Think of a tanker ship guzzling ice and spitting out fuel for the next rocket fleet. It's admittedly far less glamorous, but it's probably more valuable. So we can't dodge the Minecraft joke here. Humanity's basically planning to play creative mode with real asteroids, digging tunnels, harvesting blocks, stacking resources. Except instead of maybe diamonds, you're pulling out platinum bars worth billions. And instead, of maybe creepers blowing you up, it's micrometeorites and radiation getting you. As hard as it may be to think about, imagine, if you will, explaining this to your great grandfather. Yeah, I mortgaged a farm to buy stock in a company that's going to put Minecraft in orbit. But that's history waiting to repeat itself. So, yes, the science makes this possible, but possibility is not permission. The fact that we can tow an asteroid doesn't necessarily mean one should. The fact that exoplanets may hide new elements doesn't mean markets are ready for them. Every empire that's rushed headlong into resource wealth without restraint collapse under its own weight. So, yes, children crave the mines, even if they're space mines. So, yes, the science frontier is quite dazzling. It promises riches beyond measure, but science doesn't change human nature. And if we leap into this exoplanet gold rush without the proper wisdom, the physics may be new, but the outcome will be the same as Spain, as California, and as the South Sea. But if there's one thing that history does prove, it's that the rush starts long before the first pickaxe ever hits the rock. So let's start with the headlines. For the last decade, business magazines have floated the idea of the world's first trillionaire being a space miner. I know, did he say miner or miner? We'll go with the E in the miner here. The logic is simple. Find the right asteroid, crack it open like an egg, and suddenly you're wealthier than an oil tycoon or tech mogul ever could have dreamed of. That said, it sounds plausible until you actually start running the numbers. A single M type asteroid could crash the platinum market overnight. If platinum stops being scarce, it stops being valuable. Suddenly, that trillionaire is holding a mountain of shiny metal that nobody wants at yesterday's prices. But as we all know, if you've ever paid attention to the stock market, markets don't wait for reality. They mine in speculatives, they fantasize. And speculation has a way of turning into a frenzy. And this is how you end up with a Wall Street trader mortgaging his house to buy Element 119 futures for a mineral that does not even exist yet. But let's be honest here. During the California gold rush, some of the very first and biggest fortunes weren't made in mining, but in selling shovels, tents, eggs. The inflated prices impacted it long before the gold dust hit anyone's pouch. And you have to imagine in an exoplanet gold rush, the same thing is going to happen, but only at an orbital scale. You'll see companies selling shares in asteroid claims, futures, and exoplanetary minerals, and options on the speculative elements. Whole exchanges are sprung up before the first rock is tugged into lunar orbit. And once again, we've seen this playbook before. Speculators didn't care whether the gold was real. They cared that someone else is willing to pay for tomorrow. So now imagine this being all amplified by the sheer size of space. Derivatives built on derivatives. Hedge funds shortening oxygen futures because someone found a water rich asteroid. Day traders screaming into microphones about whether uranium on Kepler 45 2b is a buy or a sell. As absurd as it sounds, it's sadly going to be inevitable. Humanity doesn't just dig, we bet on who's successful at the dig. And with trillions on the line, this fever will probably spread faster than any gold rush in history. And yes, some poor intern will absolutely end up explaining to his boss that they just lost $5 billion because the Minecraft asteroid patch notes just dropped and did not have what they thought. Now, the economic paradox of resource rushes is this: the more you find, the less it's worth. So Spain's silver curse is the perfect example. They thought they had the infinite wealth, and instead they got inflation, dependence, and decline. Now, picture that, but only globally. What happens when plutonium stops being rare, when uranium floods the market, when helium 3 fuels every reactor? Now, of course, in every rush, there are winners, but they're rarely the dreamers. It's, as I've mentioned, the merchants, not the people doing the work. In the dot-com boom, it was the companies selling servers, not the websites themselves. In the exoplanet gold rush, the winners may be the ones building rockets, selling the real estate in space, and maybe insuring the mining fleets themselves. And the losers will be the speculators who bought too late, the nations that bought maybe bet too heavily, and the workers left behind when the industry crashed. And yet, knowing all of this, the uncomfortable truth is it will happen. It's inevitable. Part of us will be struck with the fever. The bubble will inflate, and trillionaire headlines will scream, and then reality will bite you in the ass. The question isn't whether it will happen. The question is, will we be wise enough to manage it? Because if there is one thing history guarantees, it's that human nature doesn't change. Technologies evolve, rockets soar, treaties shift, but greed seems to survive. And every frontier will look like salvation at first, and then it will blind us. It won't fill the treasuries. It will warp characters. It'll make us reckless, impatient, short-sighted. And it's kind of scary to think about because the frontier holds promise. The freedom to expand, the independence to build new colonies, new industries, maybe even possibly new civilizations. Space could be the great safety valve of human ambition. The same way the American frontier gave restless souls a place to build, settle, and survive. On the other hand, infinity tempts folly. It tempts greed. It tempts empires to overreach, corporations to gamble, and individuals to risk everything on a dream they can't touch. And this treasure will test nations. And usually, when nations are tested, bad things will happen. And this is where the story pivots. Because I've tried to tell and explain the fever, but I want to go into Act Two and show some of the sickness. What I'm calling the platinum problem. Scarcity and abundance crashing headlong in the markets that they were never designed for anything close to an infinity scale. So, if you will, before we head into that, let's imagine, I don't know, Zap Brannigan standing on the bridge of the Nimbus, bragging about staking a claim on Kepler 452b. Imagine Fry buying in and say, "Shut up and take my money," as he buys stocks in asteroid platinum. But the whole time, in the back, you have Bender running an orbital futures scam. History has a way of repeating itself even when cartoons are trying to tell us. Now, typically when people picture the first space mine, they imagine, you know, probably a robotic claw hauling out a chunk of platinum the size of a house, gleaming metal, instant riches, humanity's first trillion, if not quadrillion, runs through their heads. But it's water, again, that will be the most important, the one that, you know, might not rewrite physics. But let's face it, it's the most ordinary, overlooked resource on Earth, and now it's going to become the single most precious commodity in orbit that we will need, because in space, water isn't just life, it's fuel. So yeah, we'll make jokes, and somewhere down the road, maybe our great grandchild will be telling their kids that, oh hey, remember the great ice wars of 2085? Sounds epic until you add the footnote. It was basically the, you know, Ice Pirates movie, but maybe with less polyester and cool robots. But we have to think of it this way: water makes sense. Survival always comes first. But once we've conquered that, that's when the real trouble will begin. Because history has already taught us that sudden riches can kill an empire faster than famine. And you really do have to think about things such as asteroid like 16 Psyche containing more iron, nickel, and precious metals than all the mines in known human history. Bring even a fraction of that into circulation, and you will collapse industries overnight. Platinum will no longer buys a wedding ring, it buys a bus ticket. Uranium, once jealously guarded for strategic value, could become so cheap that every second rate regime on Earth could build a bomb. The sad truth of it is, scarcity breeds discipline. Abundance tends to breed corruption. And when the floodgates open, it doesn't make us stronger. It tempts us to waste, to gamble, and depend on treasures instead of working. Just look at any welfare program anyone has ever done. And this is the paradox economists already see coming. The more resources we mine, the less valuable they will become. And yet, even knowing this, the fever will never go away. Investors will not stop. Corporations will not slow down, and governments, they sure as heck will not restrain themselves. The rush will accelerate even as the profits shrink, because far too often human nature has never known when to quit. And that's the platinum problem. Riches that destroy value, treasures that destabilizes nations, and abundance that feels like salvation, but ends up corroding like poison. So it does leave us with one question, is whether we'll see the pattern in time, or whether we'll plunge headfirst into that same trap that has swallowed every empire before us. Because if history is any guide, we are going to Scrooge McDuck headfirst into this. So on Earth, platinum is so rare, it's become a cultural shorthand for wealth. Platinum credit cards, platinum wedding bands, platinum records. Now, only about 200 tons are mined each year, barely enough to keep up with demands in electronics, you know, catalytic converters and such, and medicine. Yes, medicine. Trust me on that one. But in space, one decent asteroid could yield millions of tons. enough to crash the market overnight. Platinum wedding rings would all of a sudden lose their status and value. Electronics, already ridiculously cheap in many regards, will become even cheaper. And that multi-billion-dollar mining industry that exists today would become a ghost town. Because it's an awful paradox when we think about it. The moment we succeed, we fail. The more we pull from the heavens, the less it's worth on Earth. Now, let's talk about that uranium problem. Uranium is tightly controlled. It fuels nuclear power plants and in weapons grade form. It fuels some of the deadliest machines humans have ever built, except for liberal white women. Scarcity is part of the safeguard. Enrichment is expensive and sources are limited. But if space suddenly dumps an ocean of uranium in the market, that's just not only an economic shift, it's a geopolitical earthquake. Nuclear weapons could become accessible to the regimes that never dreamed of affording them. Proliferation, instability, brinkmanship. The very abundance that makes uranium cheap also makes nuclear Armageddon more likely. This isn't necessarily about wealth. This is, well, danger disguised as prosperity. What about lithium and cobalt? They're the backbones of our battery powered age, electric vehicles, smartphones, laptops. And once again, scarcity drives the cost for these. And nations, some often poor, with, I know Ordy was making a joke about children craving the mines, but many of these are countries that, dictatorships that exploit children for this purpose. What happens when they no longer make money from it? Because those nations are no longer able to export it at a decent price. If space delivers endless lithium, the global EV market flips upside down. Nations like Chile and the Democratic Republic of Congo, which depend on mining revenue, see their economies implode. Jobs will vanish. Sometimes that's a good thing. And governments will destabilize. And rare earth elements, lanthanum, neodymium, europium, the ones that make our magnet screens and defense tech work, they're called rare because they're hard to extract, not because they're truly scarce. Flood the market with asteroid versions, and China's current dominance will collapse. Once again, maybe not necessarily a bad thing, but this will do all of it, entire supply chains across the world overnight. Now, people don't think that when they hear infinite riches, that there's a problem. They'll picture the cheaper cars, the cleaner energy, and the end of scarcity. They hardly take the time to picture nations collapsing, industries dying, and warlords buying warheads on clearance. It is the same exact blind spot Spain had with its silver, the same blindness every empire has when it confuses treasure for stability. But let's be honest, when people hear mining asteroids, they don't think about uranium proliferation or lithium supply chains. They think about drilling deep shafts in the alien rock. And they're not wrong, but much like humanity, and considering this is episode 69, I'd be remiss not to point out that we, as humans, I know, I just cursed at myself, has always been eager to go deeper than it should, only often to regret what it finds the more it drills. Innuendo aside, though, the truth is simple. Abundance doesn't guarantee prosperity. More often than not, it just guarantees that collapse. Let's go back to things like California. Before most miners ever struck gold, prices in San Francisco exploded. You had the cost of eggs, shovels, boots. The speculation reached fever pitch before a single man ever washed a nugget out of the stream. If you think it won't happen in space, you're fooling yourself. Companies will start selling claims to asteroids. backed by little more than a press release and a star chart. Investors will buy futures in platinum, uranium, and yes, even water ice, betting on resources that may not be extracted for decades. It really is the South Sea bubble all over again. The South Sea Company promised impossible riches from trade in South America. Shares went through the roof and then collapsed, ruining thousands. One company even sold stock under the slogan, quote, a company for carrying on an undertaking of great advantage, but nobody to know what it is, unquote. Investors lined up anyway. I mean, seriously, hey, congratulations. You just spent $10 billion to own a rock you can't even point to on a star map. Bravo, guys. That is the level of madness we could be heading for. And of course, once the claims are sold, Wall Street will do what Wall Street always does: build layers, derivatives, EFTs, hedge funds, baskets of asteroid futures. Want to invest in platinum without betting on one asteroid? Buy a basket fund. Want uranium futures hedged with rare earths? There'll be a product for that. Want to invest in asteroid mining without asteroid risk? Congratulations. There'll be an EFT that tracks the idea of asteroid mining. All the time, speculators won't care if the platinum is even real or if the uranium ever makes it back to Earth. They'll care about the price tomorrow versus the price today. That's all speculation ever is. And we've seen it time and time and time again. During the housing bubble, people bought and sold mortgage backed securities without even ever looking at the house. During the crypto craze, fortunes were staked on coins with no backing at all. In an exoplanet gold rush, fortunes will be made and lost on rocks floating millions of miles away that you can't even see with the best telescope on Earth. And when that bubble bursts, and it will, it won't be a few eccentric billionaires who lose. It'll be, of course, the pensions, the retirement funds, the small investors who all believed the hype and had the fever. And there's yet another layer to this: betting on resources that don't even exist yet. Don't think they won't sell futures on possibilities such as element 119, because it could be a room temperature superconductor. Exotic alloys no periodic table has ever dreamed of. If an astrophysicist who, maybe gets things wrong all the time and got rid of a planet, speculate about it in a conference paper, you can bet there will be an IPO for it within a year. It is the same playbook as the 19th century railroad mania. Companies sold stocks and railway lines that had no tracks, no trains, and often not even a plan. But yet, investors poured in anyway. All because they couldn't stand to miss out on the next big thing. And like I said, just like every other bubble, there will absolutely be winners. The early speculators who got in, hype the price, and sell before the collapse. And it's the stories of these guys and gals who win that does nothing to diminish the fever of everyone else the next time something comes along. And it's these, sorry to be blunt, it's these losers too that they're always the same one who always lose. They're the small investors who buy too late, the nations that build budgets on speculative resource revenues, and more importantly, the workers whose pensions get tied to these bubbles. It really is like the tulip mania, where farmers mortgage their land to buy bulbs worth 10 years' wages. When the market collapsed, they lost everything. What about the dot-com bust, where people bought stock in companies with no profits, no products, and somehow not even websites yet, only to watch the savings vanish when the bubble burst? The sad truth is, bubbles tend to always punish the vulnerable most. Those with power often will find a parachute. Those without are left in the wreckage. Because every bubble pops. Everyone, the South Sea tulips, railroads, dot coms, even most of the crypto coins, every time the same fever takes hold, the same hype blinds investors. And to think that the exoplanet gold rush bubble will not be the biggest of them all will be the cruelest joke of them all, because there will be no denying that infinite resources can be promised here. Infinite markets will be spun out of thin air. And of course, that speculation piled onto nothing more than rocks in the dark. And it's a lesson we just never seem to learn. Speculative mania proves human nature hasn't changed. Technologies, every time we see a SpaceX launch, we're getting 1 inch closer to places we've never been before. And you can see I'm guilty of it myself because I'm a dreamer of space. Every Starship launch, you see human nature speculativeness. One day we'll get back to the moon, or for the first time, depending on our point of view, we'll get to Mars. God only knows what we'll find on Mars. Hey, maybe we can get to Europa. What will Europa have? I heard one of the moons, might be diamond crusted. Every time there's a hint of that next technology that comes in, the speculation follows. And the fact that, yes, every rush has its winner, but every rush has its losers. And the trick is, they're never the ones often people expect. When Spain pulled silver out of the Andes, it wasn't the miners who got rich. Most of them actually died in the mine shafts. The profits went to the crown, to the merchants, to the bankers in Antwerp who loaned money at insane interest rates. When California was gripped by gold fever, most miners walked away broke. The real fortunes went to the storekeepers. In every rush, the loudest dreamer usually ends up with nothing but dust and death. So, who wins the exoplanet gold rush and who will lose? First, we have the obvious winners, the rocket manufacturers. Every mining company needs rockets, stations, landers, and tankers. You got SpaceX, Blue Origins, national agencies. They'll all of course, cash in. It's that classic selling shovels in a gold rush scenario. Shovel will cost $200 million a launch. Next, you'll have the insurers and legal firms step in. Someone has to write the contracts, arbitrate the disputes, insure the cargo, and fight the inevitable lawsuits. Space will generate more paperwork than platinum. And somehow, lawyers seem to always win. Then you'll have the infrastructure builders, the companies that build orbital depots, fueling stations, and smelting facilities. The first serious profits won't come, of course, from hauling platinum back to Earth. They'll come from selling ice as fuel, oxygen as life support, and orbital space as the real estate. And of course, the early speculators who get in and get out before the crash, they'll win. And along the way, they're going to hype that dream. They'll sell their shares at the peak and walk away with even more money. And once again, the losers are the same who always lose. The ordinary investors who buy too late, chase the dream after the insiders have already crashed out or in the process of cashing out. Few of them will mortgage their houses, empty out their pensions, and watch it all vanish within a week when the bubble burst. Nations that rely on the resource exports will suffer. Kazakhstan, Chile, Congo, entire governments will destabilize. And it's kind of crazy to think there's even a chance the major powers wouldn't be safe. Because the United States, Russia, China, they'll pour billions into mining projects that may never pay off. leaving the average taxpayer holding the bill. Because history is littered with the bones of great powers that chased treasure and came back in debt. But as always, and I know this has sounded very communist, it's not. This is just factual. The biggest losers will always be the workers, the men and women who believe the dream, who will sign up to operate machinery in orbit, and who gamble on stock options as part of their play. And when the market crash, and when it will, they won't have golden parachutes. They'll be left drifting, wondering what's next. And that's the hard truth. Wealth concentrated in speculation always floats upward. And it's I don't mean to sound discouraging this episode, but don't forget, last episode I talked about immortality. You have to pay for immortality. And even if you do live forever, you're going to see this all pan out over and over and over again. It's why we have 24-hour rules on social media, or at least should be, because everything changes within that first 24 hours. It's often that 24, 48, maybe a week later, when the dust settles, after the real information comes out, and after way too many people have already spent their own valuations of their, intelligence, you always see who comes out the winners and who always comes out the losers, who was peddling things on the speculative market and who just waited for, the information to actually come out. And those who, never play the game. The sobering truth is scarcity disciplines us, and abundance will always tempt us. And speculation will always ruin us. So the question isn't whether we'll mine the stars. We will. The question is whether we'll mine with discipline or decay. Will we see an abundance as a tool to maybe somehow this time strengthen civilization, to maybe build with a plan carefully, to innovate wisely, plan for future generations? And I know you're all laughing at me because we all know it'll be a quick fix, a get rich scheme, and a chance to indulge our greed at a planetary scale. History offers lessons. Nations that tempered abundance with discipline endured. Look at Rome. Yeah, Rome would eventually fall, but at its height, they built roads, aqueducts, and laws. It was when they quit doing those things that they kind of went to the wayside. In the United States, in its frontiers days, balanced expansion with constitutional order. The strength came not from the treasures, but from restraint. So we're once again left with the exoplanet gold rush paradox. We're promised infinite treasure, but without restraint, it will deliver infinite ruin. We'll be left with a bigger problem, one we truly haven't thought about and faced before. Not what we mine, not how much we find, but who owns infinity. And with that, we will be back in a few minutes.
She came in like a furnace, dressed in velvet and sin, with a map to desire and a dare on her grin. Said there's gold in this mountain, but deeper than stone. And I knew right then I'd never die alone. The room was shaking, boots on the floor. I touched her hand and begged for more. She laughed, this vein runs harder still, and whispered low, drill, baby, drill. Till the sweat lit the walls like stars, trading sins like scars in a lover's bazaar. Every gasp was a contract, every cry was a clause. I kissed her like the truth, and she bit like a cause. We signed no papers, to take what we wanted and take it now. And when she said you've got the skill, I aimed for heaven, and I drilled, baby, drill, baby, drill. Take me down deep, where secrets lie tangled and no one sleeps. I've mined for truth, I've clawed for grace, but nothing ever felt like this wild place. So drill, baby, drill. Take your time and thrill, 'cause gold ain't the prize, it's the will to feel. And when your heart hits pay dirt, stay until you drill, baby, drill.
And welcome back. As you may notice, it's 8:55 here on the East Coast, and I'm just now getting to the intermission song. So, guys, there's no Sunday night with Al, or, well, until I think October. So, I'm doing a couple extended shows, and I'm very passionate about this one. I hope you've picked up on this on the first half. And as I said before going into the mission, who owns infinity? Because if you've heard any of my Lost Wanderer episodes, you know just how much of an open-ended question that is. Because right now, when it comes to ownership in space, the crown jewel of international law is the 1967 Outer Space Treaty. And that was born at the height of the Cold War, when the US and Soviet Union were staring each other down with nuclear weapons and planning that first lunar landing. Both sides wanted to plant flags and probably more. Both sides wanted to claim glory. Both sides also knew if outer space becomes just another battlefield, humanity might not survive. So they actually signed a deal. The Outer Space Treaty banned nations from claiming sovereignty over celestial bodies. No one can own the moon, Mars, or asteroids. No military bases, no weapons of mass destruction, no territorial conquest. Outer space, in theory, belonged to everyone, the province of all mankind. On one paper, it's lofty. It reads like Star Trek: no empires, no borders, just peaceful exploration for the benefit of all humanity. But like Star Trek, you often run into other things. But the problem is, treaties are only as strong as the will to actually enforce them. And when we look at the world's history, paper guarantees don't stop people from chasing treasure. The Treaty of Tordesillas was once paper too. And let's face it, the Outer Space Treaty was never designed for mining. In 1967, the idea of hauling platinum out of an asteroid sounded like something you would find in a kid's sci-fi comic. The treaty solved the problem of nukes in orbit, but it kind of punted the question on resources. What happens when a private company scoops up 10 million tons of nickel? The treaty doesn't say. What happens when a nation licenses that company and profits off the haul? The treaty doesn't say. And that gap is what really makes it fragile. Now, yes, in 1979, the United Nations tried to fix the loophole with the Moon Agreement. It declared the moon and its resources to be the, quote, common heritage of mankind, unquote. Any mining, any exploitation was supposed to be managed collectively with profits shared for the benefit of all nations. Yeah, I know, it sounds noble. Almost no one signed it. The United States, Russia, and China, you know, the three big guys in space right now, all refused. To them, it was too restrictive. Why share profits with everyone when you're the one taking the risk and doing the work? As a result, the Moon Agreement had no teeth. It's a treaty in name only, ignored by those who actually, you know, it really matters to the most. So right now, the legal status of space is this: no one can own it, but everyone is maneuvering to find ways around that rule. Yeah, and Ordy, you're probably right because it'll probably be cheaper on the moon. Now, private companies lobby their government for licenses. Governments pass national law saying, "Sure, you can mine asteroids. We'll recognize your rights." Don't think that'll happen. The U.S. did it in 2015, and Luxembourg did it in 2017, and of course, Japan followed suit. The patchwork grows. Every nation carving out expectations while still claiming they respect the treaty. And this is how loopholes turn into law. Everyone says they're honoring the Outer Space Treaty, but in practice, they're just building legal scaffolding for ownership. Without clarity, chaos will fill the void, and a treaty that leaves too much unsaid isn't stability, it's an invitation to conflict and to exploit. Now, if you have listened to my other show, the Lost Wanderer podcast, you've heard me talk about space not just as a playground for science, but as proving grounds for humanity. I've said it before, the laws we write now will echo for centuries, just like maritime law shaped empires. Space law will shape civilizations. Now, whatever you think of the Outer Space Treaty, it was a good first step, but it was written for an era of rockets and not miners. It solved yesterday's dangers, nuclear weapons, but left tomorrow's dangers wide open. And tomorrow's danger, kind of hate saying it, is ownership. Because sooner or later, someone will mine an asteroid, someone will haul back metals, and someone will cash the check. And when they do, the paper promises of 1967 will either have to be enforced or they'll just simply be ignored. And history often tells us ignored is more likely. Now, on the high seas, shipping companies have long used what's called flags of convenience. Instead of registering a vessel in their own country, they register it in nations with weaker regulations: Panama, Liberia, the Marshall Islands. That way, they get to dodge those little things such as labor law, safety rules, and probably the most important, taxes. Now imagine the same logic in orbit. A mining company based in New York or Tokyo doesn't register its asteroid fleet at home. Instead, it flies the flag of a nation with no real oversight. A convenient little island state happy to cash registration fees while, looking the other way. If it sounds far fetched, it isn't. It's already being discussed, and it would shred the Outer Space Treaty in practice, even while everyone insists they're respecting it in principle. And we got to be honest. If there's one thing more renewable than asteroid platinum, it's lawyers figuring out new ways to breed loopholes. And of course, you have corporations acting as private actors while serving national agendas. Don't believe me? I have a segment on Lost Wonder that talks about it all the flippin' time. A company might be nominally independent, but funded, supported, and guided by its home government. If it makes a claim, it's a private enterprise, or is it state sovereignty by proxy? The Outer Space Treaty forbids nations from claiming territory, but what if their corporations do it for them? It's the same trick empires use with trading company. The East India Company wasn't technically the British crown, but its ships carried the Union Jack. Its armies fought wars, and its profits sure as hell did fuel the empire. If that wasn't a corporate front for state power, I don't know what was. So, do we really think asteroid mining will be any different? No, some countries have already started laying the groundwork. In 2015, the United States passed the Commercial Space Launch Competitiveness Act, declaring the U.S. citizens engaged in space mining have the right to own what they extract. In 2017, Luxembourg followed suit, openly advertising itself as a hub for asteroid mining companies. Bravo, Luxembourg. And Japan passed similar legislation in 2021. Now, these laws don't claim territory, but they claim resources. It's a nice little dance maneuver around the Outer Space Treaty. No, no, we're not planting flags. We're just recognizing ownership of what you bring home. Now, of course, once nation finally do break ground, others will, of course, follow. The U.S. says its companies can own asteroid resources. Do you really think China will not do the same? Russia, if they still exist by the time they can do this, will they follow? Smaller nations, of course, will scramble to pass laws so they don't get left behind. And the treaty will remain technically intact because there's technically no flags on Mars. But ownership by loophole is still ownership. And when fortunes are at stake, loopholes will multiply. Now, of course, flags of convenience, corporate fronts, national loopholes, they all point to the same reality. The exoplanet gold rush won't be governed by paper promises. It will be governed by power, by who gets there first, who has the resources to defend their claims, and who has the nastiest weapon of all, the lawyers to write the contracts afterwards. And history, as once more, offers the precedent. The seas were once declared a commons, free to all. But that didn't stop nations from carving spheres of influence, corporations from seizing trade routes, and empires from fighting wars over shipping lanes. I'm looking at you, War of 1812. The same will happen in space. And when it does, the question won't be, what does that treaty say? It'll be, yeah, go ahead and try to enforce it. And this is why sovereignty will matter. This is why I think restraint will matter. Without clear ownership, chaos isn't just probable, it's more inevitable. And while the treaty trap gives us that noble, flowerish language many like, it's really toothless. The loopholes expose the fragility, and unless nations act with discipline, the gold rush of the exoplanets will just follow the same path as every frontier before it. Noble, flowering words on paper shattered by greed and weaponry in practice. Now, capitalism won't wait for miners and shovels. It builds the markets, the moments there's even the hint of commodity, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. And in 2025, those markets aren't science fiction anymore. They're already looking at us from over the horizon. Because the earliest tradable resource in space wasn't platinum or isn't platinum or uranium or some exotic new element. It's fuel, propellant, plain old rocket juice. On Earth, you buy it at the pump. In orbit, it's the lifeblood of every mission. Without fuel, satellites die, rockets stall, and spacecraft drift into the graveyard belt. And for far too many years, every satellite launch was a one-way trip. Pack all the possible propellant you'd ever need, and when it ran dry, your billion-dollar satellite was just space junk waiting for Al to get his company started. But now companies are standing up the infrastructure to deliver fuel in orbit. Yes, orbital gas stations are going to be a thing. One American startup even published a price sheet up to 100 kilograms of propellant delivered to geostationary orbit for about $20 million. That's not a dream. This is an actual contract. And once you've posted price for fuel, guess what? You've got the markings of a market. Contracts, futures, hedging against delays. These are the bones of orbital Wall Street. Now, the second commodity is one you may not necessarily think of on first thought, because that second commodity is time. A few years ago, Northrop Grumman pulled off something extraordinary. They launched a spacecraft, the mission extension vehicle, that docked with an aging satellite, latched on, and gave it a new lease on life. 5 more years of service bought and paid for. Orbital life extension isn't theoretical anymore. It is an actual product, a service contract, something that can be booked, insured, and yes, even traded. In financial terms, it's the securitization of space. A spacecraft's lifespan is no longer set in stone. It is now negotiable. And negotiable things can be commodified. But what about that big, amazing satellite that we see most nights, the moon? In February 2024, for the first time since Apollo, if you are not a moon denier, an American lander touched down softly on the lunar surface. It wasn't a government rocket, it was a commercial one. Sure, it carried NASA's payloads, but it also carried the price sheet for a new market: kilograms deliverable to the moon. And that is a language markets understand. Payload capacity, price per kilogram, delivery window. Once you can quote it, you can contract it. Once you can contract it, you can speculate on it. And sooner or later, you'll be able to hedge against lunar delivery delays the same way they hedge their jet fuel prices. And I know I mentioned it earlier, but Al, waiting on his company to build up because garbage in space, the debris and cleanup is becoming a service. Some will call space debris a growing crisis. We do have a fair number of dead satellites, rocket bodies, and shards of collisions all throughout. Every piece is a bullet at orbital velocity. There are companies now designing spacecraft to chase down that debris, capture it, and deorbit it safely. The first contracts are already signed in Europe and Japan. So that makes it a service, which now has value, which is now tradable. So put it together and the pattern is obvious. Fuel in orbit, priced and deliverable. Satellite extension proven and contractable. Kilograms to the moon flown and invoiced. Debris removal and development and contracted. These aren't fairy tales. They're actual today products. And once again, if you have a product, it can be insured, financed, and securitized. The language of markets is already steeping in the footsteps of orbit. So no, we don't technically have a commodities exchange trading asteroid platinum. That's still probably decades away, if it ever actually becomes feasible. But we've already had the opening act of orbital Wall Street, the slow, somber transformation of services into securities. Norms are already evolving in de facto property rights. The Artemis Accord, something I start every Lost Wanderer show with when a new signee comes on, creates safety zones around lunar operations. Temporary, cooperative, but non-sovereign. But in practice, they look a lot more like easements or operational territories. The kind of thing investors recognize as good enough when it comes to financing. And that's how ownership starts, not with grand declarations, but with practical fictions everyone agrees to treat as real. So whether you like it or not, orbital Wall Street is already here. Not as a flashy trading floor in low Earth orbit, but as contracts, services, and the norms that quietly turn infinity into cash flows. It isn't a question anymore whether these markets will form, because they have. The question is whether laws, sovereignty, and order can keep up, or will greed outpace governance. And let's once again face it, history has taught us anything. Markets always arrive first and law always limps in after. And when ownership is uncertain, chaos fills the vacuum. In the New World, it was papal bulls and imperial flags. At sea, it was trading companies and privateers. Every time the law stumbled behind greed, the people would pay the price. Space will be no different. And yes, the Outer Space Treaty was a noble attempt to head off a new age of empires, and the Moon Agreement tried to bind nations to the ideal of common heritage by the people who can't even build wells yet. Nations will, of course, carve out loopholes, and corporations will sharpen their contracts to avoid all of it. And orbital Wall Street will begin pricing services long before anyone has ever touched an actual asteroid. Treaties will do nothing to stop the exoplanet gold rush. The rush will not be contained by markets, and will only be governed if nations assert clear authority. But let's face it, authority is costly. It requires presence, enforcement, and sacrifice. And history once again has suggested that we may not be willing to pay any or all of that price. It's easier, way easier, to let loopholes do all the work and let the market set the rules, to let paper promises stand in for discipline. Now, all of this, the first 74 minutes, if you're still listening, thank you. All of this is all based on the assumption that humanity is alone in this future marketplace, that the only players are nations, corporations, and investors. But what if they're not? What if the exoplanet gold rush brings us face to face, not just with resources, but with neighbors, not with rocks to mine, but with rivals to trade with or compete against? Guess what? Treaties don't cover any of that. Loopholes right now don't even imagine that. Orbital Wall Street doesn't price it, and yet if the universe is as vast and strange as we believe, the day may come when the question isn't who owns infinity, but who will have to bargain with it. And that's where we're headed next. Because you thought I was going to do an exoplanet gold rush without talking about aliens. Hi, I'm Jeff. I'm from Alpha Centauri. Pleasure to meet you. So the question becomes, what if we're not the first miners in space? European explorers didn't discover new lands. They stumbled into existing trade networks in many cases. The Aztecs traded obsidian and cacao. The Chinese sailed vast treasure fleets. Africa had gold routes that stretched across deserts and oceans. When outsiders arrived, they weren't walking into a blank slate. They were crashing someone else's market, technically. Why will space be any different? If the galaxy is as old as we think it is, and if life emerges even occasionally, I won't cover the Drake equation today, then the odds are good that someone else has already been here first. Maybe not in our solar system, though who's to say? It's certainly, a wide neighborhood when you think about it in universe terms. And 1 billion years is plenty of time for another civilization to climb the ladder, master technology, and start harvesting the heavens. Astronomers already hunt for these signs of industrial activity in the stars. We look for Dyson swarms, vast arrays of satellites soaking up a star's energy. We model Kardashev civilizations, measuring progress by energy use. Some scientists even scan for chemical traces in exoplanet atmospheres that might hint at the sign of manufacturing. It's speculation, admittedly, but so was asteroid mining 50 years ago, and here we are, sketching contracts for orbital propellants in 2025. So imagine the moment when humanity stretches into the stars and discovers we're late to the party. Imagine finding an asteroid belt that's already been stripped bare, a gas giant whose helium has been siphoned, a star dimmed by swarms of collectors, infinity already claimed. Now, for being honest, prudence means preparing for competition, not utopia. It would, of course, be wonderful to imagine benevolent aliens smiling and eager to share. I mean, science fiction loves that fantasy. And I don't think human history is necessarily that different from alien history. Every encounter between civilizations with unequal power has tilted towards exploitation, not equality. Why would the laws of economics change just because the players are extraterrestrial? If there is a galactic marketplace, then humanity won't enter it as its masters. We'll enter it as rookies. And rookies are the ones usually having to carry the bags, and they don't get to set the rules. So that's the cosmic question that this exoplanet gold rush will force upon us. It isn't just about how much platinum is out there or how quickly we can build the orbital Wall Street to really matter. It's about what happens if the rush brings us face to face with neighbors. These neighbors who maybe they've been mining longer, who've built markets older than our species. You might see Earth not as a partner, but now as a new resource in the orbital Wall Street. Yes, we've always imagined in our minds the gold rush as a race against ourselves and other countries here on Earth. But what if it isn't? And that's where Act 4 is taking us. Because if there really are others out there, the gold rush doesn't just open new frontiers, but new rivals. And the next question is, of course, chilling, but irresistible. What could we possibly trade with them? So here we are at that Stargate, ready to step in through the portal. We spent many minutes talking about rocks, resources, and the fever of speculation. But if this takes us far enough into the stars, we may not be alone in that market. And that really changes the game. Even here on the little itty bitty blue ball called Earth, frontiers are rarely empty. So what could we offer? The first and most obvious export isn't gold or platinum or nickel. It's humans. Believe it or not, biology is most likely Earth's crown jewel. The sheer range of life here is staggering. Bacteria that digest arsenic, plants that turn sunlight into sugar, whales that navigate oceans with low frequency symphonies, humans who can build microchips and play Beethoven on a violin. Now, to all of us, it's familiar. To someone who evolved under another sun, it might be exotic beyond imagining. Our DNA is a library, a billionaire record of evolutionary trial and error. For us, it's just inheritance. For others, it could be currency. And whether you want to face it or not, that's not science fiction. That's pattern recognition. Humans have always traded the living. Horses, dogs, sheep, and crops were once regional oddities. Through trade, they became global staples. In the galactic market, what if a cow, what if it's more valuable than cobalt? What if microbes are worth more than manganese? You don't sell the seed corn. Stewardship means protecting the foundation of life. Trade away too much of it, and you may realize too late that you've bartered your grandchildren's inheritance for what are essentially tiny trinkets. But maybe, just maybe, biology isn't the only thing aliens would want, or the most important thing they want. Maybe what they would really crave is really what makes humans human: culture. Rocks are common, art is not. We really don't know if the galaxy has Bach or Shakespeare, Coltrane. God, can you imagine if we're the only one on the entire universe that has Coltrane? We don't know if anyone else can even, write a poem. We know the Volgons can't. What if they can't paint? What if they can't write a beautiful story that makes strangers weep? If they can't, our art might be the rarest export of all. Imagine a civilization so old it's forgotten surprise. Imagine a people who have seen stars die and galaxies collide, but who've never heard a symphony or read a story of lovers who choose each other over empires. To them, that creativity could be priceless. And yes, Orty, I'm including memes in that. You could be a very tradable commodity. I mean, let's face it. A silly picture with clever caption might be meaningless to us in 50 years, but to someone who's never seen humor expressed that way, it could be intoxicating. At its core, the Silk Road didn't just carry spices, it carried ideas. Buddhism spread across Asia because of merchants, not missionaries. Alphabets and myths traveled alongside silk and salt. Trade has always carried culture, and cultural changes everything. And whether or not you want to admit it, culture is not just an export, it's our soul. We have to wonder if we trade it, we must guard against letting it be cheapened or twisted, because once given, ideas cannot be recalled. Now, talked about what we have to offer. What might we want? What would we be willing to buy? Easy one is energy, fusion networks, antimatter bottled like propane, Dyson swarm collectors that make scarcity a relic of the past. That's worth almost any price when you really look at it. Of course, then you have maybe medicine, maybe cures for all known ills of mankind. Maybe there's a sarcophagus somewhere that magically repairs the human body. I know that's two Stargate references so far. A therapy that repairs the ravages of age, something that restores sight, sound, and strength. Of course, we'll want knowledge, libraries of civilization that rose and fell long before we learned how to walk, maps of the galaxies, physics we haven't dreamed of, a window into the deepest truths of the universe. But there's a danger in that too. When you want something too much, you will end up paying any price. And the weaker partner never gets a fair deal. Because let's face it, history proves this as well. King China paid with sovereignty in the 19th century. Africa was carved up in boardrooms thousands of miles away. The Aztecs and Inca traded gold for steel, but the exchange was always unequal. The powerful set the terms. The desperate signed them. What could possibly make us think the galactic market will be any kinder? So, what might aliens ask of us? Not just cows and concertos, maybe something stranger. Maybe they want our time. Not our hours, but our lifespans. If they live for millennia, our rapid generational cycles could actually fascinate them. I mean, to think every 80 years, a new wave of human thought, new art, new politics, new inventions. To them, we're fireworks, brief, brilliant, and endlessly renewing. That alone could be a commodity. Maybe they want our conflict. I know it sounds dark, but the galaxy may not be peaceful. If you wanted mercenaries, would you hire the species that industrialized war, that can mobilize millions with bureaucratic precision? Our capacity for organized violence is amazing and terrifying, and it could be valuable. The galactic market may not want our peace, it may want our soldiers. They might want our attention. If you will, think of Rome and its circuses. Think of a modern entertainment. Whole empires run on spectacle. What if the galaxy is tired, decadent, and bored? What if they Crave is raw novelty of our arts, our games, our chaos. Humanity as the ultimate reality show. Earth as that entertainment channel for civilizations that forgot how to laugh. Of course, they might just want our data, our genomes, our weather, our social graphs, knowledge of a living planet that may not even be in its prime yet. To us, it's numbers. To them, it could be strategy. A map is never just a map. It is often a weapon in waiting. But there's a hammer to this. Not every deal is worth making. History is littered with bargains that ruined nations. Look what the opium trade did to China. Unequal treaties turned great empires into clients. Whole peoples lost their sovereignty because they couldn't say no to a tempting offer. And if you do not think in the galactic market the offers will be dazzling, whew, the technology, the medicine, the energy, all there for a price. But if the price is our essence, our biology, our culture, our sovereignty, then we should consider that trade poison. And once again, this comes back to why discipline will matter. It's why sovereignty will matter. Markets often reward the party that can walk away. Because if we can't walk away, then we're not trading, we're begging. The first neighbors won't be across the galaxy either. They'll be close. Statistically speaking, it's most likely to be the star system near us. Oh, I don't know, say Proxima Centauri, Alpha Centauri A or B. If there's life there, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, if there's a civilization there, then the first trade won't be at some distant star. It'll actually be what is a galactic neighbor. And the question won't be, what do we want? It'll be, what do we risk by showing up too early, too eager, and too desperate? Because if they've been mining longer, they have, trading longer, they have, and building longer, they have, then we're not pioneers. We're rookies walking into someone else's market. And that's the chilling truth. The exoplanet gold rush may not just tempt us with abundance, it may tempt us with dependency as well. And dependency is just a prelude of subjugation. Because the strong doesn't just outtrade the weak, they bind them, they make them need. And when you need too much, you can't say no. And this becomes the devil's bargain. Because unequal trades aren't accidents, they're strategies. Once again, history full of agreements that were never agreements at all, only the strong setting terms the weak couldn't refuse. 19th century China, European powers opened the market not with handshakes, but with gunboats. Opium was the bait, addiction the leash, and treaties the paper chains. China, of course, got to keep its name, but it lost its sovereignty. The price wasn't gold, it was control. China doesn't convince you. How about Africa? In 1884, European powers gathered in Berlin to divide an entire continent. Not a single African voice was at the table. Contracts, concessions, spheres of influence, all carved up on maps thousands of miles away. The resource wealth was immense. The bargain was, of course, a poison. And we can look here at America. Indigenous people signed treaties promising peace and trade only to see their promises broken, whether they became, inconvenient or whatnot. These deals were always tilted, always temporary, and always designed to benefit one side at the expense of the other. This is the shape of the devil's bargain, a deal that looks like prosperity but delivers servitude. So now let's extrapolate that pattern at the galactic market. Aliens arrive with wonders we can barely even comprehend. Medicines that erase disease, energy that banishes scarcity, technology that bends our understanding of physics. And they, of course, will offer it to us at a price. Probably not money, probably not platinum, probably something way deeper. Oh, yeah, share your DNA libraries, open your ecosystems, give us labor, give us soldiers, give us your loyalty. Of course, it will sound fair, it will even sound generous, but it won't be a partnership. It'll be a contract written by the powerful, enforced by dependency, sealed by our own desperation. Once again, the devil's bargain. It promises salvation, but it costs your soul. Not every miracle is worth the price tag. Yes, a cure for every cancer is priceless. Yes, endless energy would change civilization overnight. Yes, technology that opens the stars would fulfill our oldest dreams. But if the price is sovereignty, it's too high. If the price is dependence, it's too high. If the price is humanity, it's too high. Too high, too high, too high. Because dependency won't arrive with a bang. It will always arrive as a convenience. Don't believe me? Think of smartphones. It's a marvel of technology. And yet entire societies now depend on them for commerce, communication, even a large segment their identity. Shut down the networks and the world will grind to a halt. Is smartphones a tool or is it just a leash? Now imagine the leash held by someone who isn't human. Imagine alien energy grids powering entire cities, alien medicines keeping our populations alive. The first few years would feel like an absolute amazing utopia. Whether you believe it or not, the long game would feel like chains. Because when your survival depends on someone else's technology, you no longer negotiate, you obey. Rome didn't conquer every land by legions alone. It conquered with roads, aqueducts, and coinage. Infrastructure that made provinces dependent on the system that was Rome. The empire's genius wasn't just war, it was integration. Once you drank Roman water, once you paid Roman coin, once you traveled Roman roads, you were Roman, whether you liked it or not. The devil's bargain in space would look exactly the same. Trade that feels like progress becomes dependency. Dependency becomes control, and control always leads to servitude. Progress, dependency, servitude. And let's be real. Imagine explaining to your grandkids that Earth lost its independence because somebody swapped our DNA for free alien Wi-Fi. I mean, it's not just a bad deal. That's like the galactic version of pwning someone's grandma's, wedding ring to pay for your Netflix subscription. But again, this isn't speculation. It's a pattern. Empires never trade fairly with the weak. They trade with a strategy. And unless humanity goes into the galactic market with discipline, humanity will be the weak ones. So as we walk away from this part of the story, remember the shape of the devil's bargain. It doesn't come with horns and a pitchfork. It'll come with a smile and a contract. It comes with miracles offered at impossible discounts. It comes with promises of wealth and security. And then it will bind you. And that is the risk of the exoplanet gold rush. Not just bubbles, not just abundance, not just ownership, but the bargains that looks like salvation and deliver servitude. And that's the last test. Because if we can't resist that bargain, then all the treaties, all the markets, and all the rockets won't save us. The rush, well, it tests our wealth, it'll test our will, and it'll definitely test our soul. We've walked through fever and frenzy, through speculation and scarcity, through treaties and loopholes, and finally through the marketplace of the cosmos itself. And if there's one lesson that repeats in every corner of this story, is frontiers don't just test technology, they more often than not test character. We will be tempted with abundance, Speculation will blind us, and power will absolutely corrupt us. Those are just simple patterns. And the exoplanet gold rush is not an exception. It'll be an amplification of every temptation humanity has possibly ever faced. History has whispered these warnings forever. Spain in the silver, California in the gold, China through trade treaties, Africa with the maps drawn far off capitals could mean peace. They were all wrong. The rush always promised wealth. The rush always cost more than it gave. And the rush always tends to leave ruin in its wake. And this is the test that is awaiting in the stars, not whether we can mine them. Oh, we can, no doubt about that. Not whether we can build the rockets or the contracts. Oh, we can definitely do that too. But whether we can mine with discipline, with restraint, and without surrendering the very things that make humans human. Because wealth without order is chaos, trade without sovereignty is servitude, and progress without restraint is ruin. And that is the hammer. That is the warning. That is really the choice we're left with. Yes, the exoplanet gold rush is inevitable, but its outcome may not be. We don't need to rush blindly. We don't need to let greed and speculation lead. We do. We'll repeat every mistake that's been carved into history's ruins that we should be paying attention to. But if we somehow find the way to lead with wisdom, we remember stewardship, sovereignty, and discipline, then maybe, just maybe, infinity doesn't have to destroy us. It can absolutely elevate us. And it will come. All that test will definitely come. And when it does, the question will not be, what can we mine? It will be, what will we refuse to sell? And that brings us to the end of episode 69. From fever to treaties, from orbital Wall Street to the devil's bargain, we've seen how the rush isn't just about rocks in the void. It's about really who you are, who we are, and who we might become. But more importantly, who we dare not to become. Now, if tonight felt a little heavy, that left you maybe a little unsettled, good. That was my plan. That's what these stories are supposed to do. They're not comfort food, they're reminders. History doesn't repeat or just repeat it, will often rhyme in different languages. And unless we learn, it rhymes louder and louder every single time, only with newer technology. Now, as for the next time, we're heading into territory that will make tonight's speculation might make it look a little tame, maybe not, because if this episode asks, what if one day we trade with aliens, becomes the next one, what if we already did? That's right, ITC episode 70, Project Serpo, a secret human alien exchange program. Half rumor, half conspiracy, half X-File. I know that makes 3 halves. It's a new math. Until then, please, for the love of all, guard your sovereignty, measure your bargains, and remember, not all treasure is worth the price.